Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing round 1 of the Calder Cup playoffs for the San Jose Barracuda as they complete tonight the series sweep over the Ontario Reign. And it's a little bit strange to call this a sweep because in the NHL that would imply that you won the first 4 games of your best of 7 series to finish it out, while in the AHL they do things a little bit differently. In the Pacific Division at the very least, the first round is actually just a best of 3, and so a sweep is just a 2-0 victory. Still impressive though to not manage to spot even a single victory to the Ontario Reign here. And you see a couple of nights ago it started off with a 2-0 victory, and tonight it was a 2-1 victory. Two things stand out immediately from these scores. The first of which is the kind of general lack of offense here for the Barracuda, managing just 2 goals in both of these games. Not outstanding, but more impressively so, and what was the real difference maker here, is that their goaltending was superb, giving up just 1 goal in these 2 games combined. You're going to win a lot of games if that is the case. So offensively, it's somewhat excusable, the struggles that the Barracuda would have here. At the moment, they are quite heavily decimated by injuries, the first of which on the blue line, Shakir Mukhamadullin was expected to be a big factor for this Barracuda team in the playoffs this year. The San Jose Sharks had specifically sent him down at the deadline so he would be eligible to play in this situation. Unfortunately, that shoulder injury that required surgery means he's not really going to be much of an option. Even if the Barracuda do end up making it quite deep, I highly doubt he gets into any action. At least though, on the forward side of things, the players who are currently injured are closer to return, the first of which to look at would be Podorowski, out with a week-to-week injury, but he's already missed a decent amount of time, so it's possible he is somewhat close. Whether or not he's eligible to return in this series, or if we might have to wait for the next series, as long as the Barracuda can actually win, I'm not entirely sure, but he would obviously be a huge boost to this lineup. Not only is Podorowski the leading scorer for the Barracuda, he's actually the leading scorer in the entire AHL. Luckily for the Barracuda, however, they do have 2 forwards who are likely even closer to return. Bordeaux, his injury, there's not a ton of information there, but it doesn't seem super serious. He could just be back at any point, really. And then for Gushin, he was already a game time decision for both of the games of this series. I suspect he'll be ready to go for game 1 in a few days whenever that does start. So there are some reinforcements on the way to help out the scoring. They kind of struggled here in both of these games against Ontario. As I mentioned, however, luckily for them, their goaltending was outstanding, and it's not that much of a surprise when they have likely the best goaltender in the entire AHL in Yaroslav Askarov. He hasn't actually played a ton of games for the Barracuda this season, like less than a third of their total games this season have been started by Askarov. This is because both injuries that he sustained near the end of the season, as well as large stints having to be spent in the NHL due to some NHL goaltender injuries. So he hasn't played a ton. Back at the beginning of the season, when he was in the lineup and healthy for them, the Barracuda were close to unstoppable, but then since Askarov has been more up and down, suddenly the Barracuda were more of an up and down team, as you would expect over those last few months. But we see here now, it seems as though he is 100% healthy, ready to go, and we can see the type of performance he can provide with these incredible games that he was able to put up. Game 1, it didn't have to be amazing. It's still a shutout, so obviously quite impressive, but I don't even believe the Ontario Reign had a shot in the third period of that game. But it was really in game 2 where he proved his worth. The latter parts of the second period, the early parts of the third period, the Reign were pushing. They had tons of great chances, and Askarov lets in just the 1 goal in both of these games, as I said, combined. So he was really good, and these playoffs, it's actually an opportunity to prove himself, despite the fact that, as I said, he's already viewed as the best goaltender in the AHL. His playoff track record isn't the greatest. Last year with the Milwaukee Admirals, he played 5 games, not amazing stats, and then the year before that, he played 12 games with the Admirals before actually losing his starting job to the backup Devin Cooley at the time, who finished out those playoffs for the Admirals. So Askarov, maybe an opportunity here to show that when the pressure is on and you're in these elimination games, that he can really step up and put up elite performances. It will hopefully be helped by the fact that now there is a much clearer future for Askarov within the San Jose Sharks organization. When he was with Nashville, there was always that thought in the back of his mind of, well, maybe I need to kind of request a trade here because I'm stuck behind UC Saros. But Askarov is very well aware of the fact that as soon as next year, he will be the Sharks' starting goaltender, and so he doesn't have to worry about whatever might be happening. He's going to be happy here in San Jose with the role that he's going to play in, and this is likely his last chance of playing in the Calder Cup playoffs. Hopefully he's able to run with it. When it comes next to the next player on this list, we have Luca Cagnoni. It should be noted I won't be talking about every single player who played in either of these games for the Barracuda, instead focusing on a few key young players, and even then I'll be leaving out a couple guys like Jack Thompson, just so the video doesn't go on for forever. But next, we do have Cagnoni, and I mentioned Askarov, the MVP for the San Jose Barracuda, and if the Barracuda are to make a deep run, he will likely have to continue to be that MVP. But outside of the goaltender, Cagnoni was likely the Barracuda's best player. Just an incredible set of 2 games for himself. That first game, he picks up a couple of assists on these goals, both of them secondary, but this is really where you see the kind of differentiation between a not so useful secondary assist and then a really, really important one. So on this first goal from Regenda, he doesn't actually participate too much, even if he does get the point. But on this second goal, he was incredibly important on the defensive side of things and the offensive side of things, showing his value in both situations as a 200-foot player. Because this is a shorthanded 2-on-1 for Ontario, a time in which they are trailing just 1-0 in this game. So this could have been the game-tying goal. But as they go for that cross-ice pass, Cagnoni is able to intercept it, maintain possession, and then within just a split second, send it right up the ice, stretch pass to Colin White waiting at the offensive zone blue line, and then a few seconds later, it ends up in the back of the Reign's net on a Philip Bystedt goal. That ends up being the insurance one that makes this a 2-0 game. So Cagnoni just being so incredibly important, and we saw the value that he brings to this team in actually the second game here, because he would go down with an injury in the final few minutes of the second period. He wouldn't play those last 3 or so minutes, and then the first few of the third period as well. And this was really the time in which the Ontario Reign turned it on, and the Barracuda really, really struggled in their own end. You could see them not really being able to execute many breakouts. A lot of times it's just chipping the puck out, going for a change. It was just not great to see, but then once Cagnoni comes back, he's got the face shield on. He really just elevates the rest of the team, and it's not that he's playing in every situation, right? At the end of this game, when the Reign are trailing by 1 and have the goaltender pulled, Cagnoni is not on the ice in that spot, but what they say is that the best defense is a good offense, and Cagnoni provides really, really great offense. He pushes the pace forward for the Barracuda, and that really gives them the confidence to play in the offensive zone. And this is exactly what I have mentioned in the past when it comes to the San Jose Sharks these last couple of years, where they have not had that offensive D-man. Wallman came relatively close this season, but not close enough to really make the difference for the Sharks, who because of this were constantly hemmed into their own zone. Cagnoni, he's not yet able to provide this at the NHL level for the Sharks. That's hopefully something that will come perhaps as soon as next year, maybe in the next couple of years, but he can provide that for the Barracuda, and we are seeing him do it in both of these first playoff games, and hopefully can continue into the future games that they will play. When it comes to Philip Bystedt, I wouldn't say the expectations on Bystedt were super high coming into this season. This was a player who was making the transition to the North American game, his first full season in North America with the San Jose Barracuda, so I don't think anyone really thought he'd be making the jump to the NHL. That's more so like a next year goal, or maybe even the year after that. You really just wanted him to be able to find a home here, and he was pretty good at times this season, but he really struggled with his consistency. He'd have a few good games, then a few bad games, so that was a little bit of a problem for him. And what makes this very interesting is that at the trade deadline this season, the San Jose Sharks decided to trade Fabian Zetterlund to pick up Zach Ostapchuk, a player who Mike Grier is very high on and views as the future third-line center for this team. And why this is relevant is because Philip Bystedt previously was viewed as the future third-line center for this team. So is this a situation where Mike Grier is just trying to maybe bring in a little bit of backup here to try and just be like a kind of a fallback option? Or is this a situation where maybe they don't view Philip Bystedt as highly as they previously did, and maybe more in that fourth-line center role? Who's to say? And so for this playoff run, it is very important for Philip Bystedt to put up a good performance here, because all of the eyes in the organization are going to be on what the Barracuda are doing, because there's no San Jose Sharks playoffs to watch. This is the only thing that's actually going on in San Jose hockey, and so everyone's going to be looking at players like Bystedt, especially in the role that he was placed in for these games. With no Podorowski and no Bordeleau and no Gushin, everybody has to play higher up in the lineup. That includes Bystedt. He got some big minutes here in these two games, and I actually did think he played rather well The first game, I thought he was one of the Sharks' better forwards, and he scored that very important goal that made it 2-0. The second game, a little bit more of a middling effort, had a couple of mistakes here or there, but generally I still thought was rather solid. He needs to try and maintain that spot in the prospect depth charts for the San Jose Sharks if he wants to maintain a certain level of relevancy here within the organization. When it comes next to Colin Graf, perhaps my expectations were a little bit too high for Graf. The reason for this is that back at the beginning of the season, obviously he was putting up a bunch of points for the Barracuda, very, very useful player for them, and he ends up earning a call-up to the Sharks to play in the NHL. He stays there for a couple of months. He continues to hone his defensive game, but also shows a lot of flashes offensively, and so I thought coming back now to the Barracuda, he would be like this really dominant player, and this isn't to say that he played poorly in both of these games. In fact, he was actually still one of the Barracuda's better players for sure, but maybe I was expecting slightly more offense to be generated from him. To be fair, at the very least, and I've mentioned this multiple times already, many injuries are hurting the Barracuda at forward. No Bordeleau, no Gushin, no Podorowski. In particular, Podorowski, he made up a strong duo with Graf back at the beginning of the season. That really allowed Graf to flourish offensively. And so without them, it's a lot more difficult to generate offense. You know, you think of, let's say, the San Jose Sharks. If you look at someone like Will Smith, if there's no Celebrini and Eklund and Toffoli and they're all out with injury, it's going to be more difficult for Will Smith to be putting up the points. Same situation that Graf is currently in. So maybe I shouldn't have had those high expectations, but once more players do return to this lineup, that should be happening quite soon. I will hope that Graf can really elevate his level of play. This is likely his last playoffs in the AHL as a whole, considering he's probably going to be more of an NHL long-term player as soon as next season. So a good chance to really showcase what he can do in this higher intensity type of situation for himself. Again, he was good, but I am looking for great. Next, we move on to Ethan Cardwell, and this was a player who I really thought would thrive in the higher intensity or the expected higher intensity playoff situation, but this brings me into my next point, something that I had tweeted out at the beginning of the first game of this series in the first period, which is that in the NHL, you expect a very high level of intensity and just excitement from a playoff game. I've mentioned many times where a playoff game and a regular season game, very, very different, for even with no context and no details, you watch the first few minutes of a game, you can immediately tell whether or not it's postseason or not. And so, while obviously the AHL was going to be a much lower skill level, I thought it would be somewhat similar, and we'd see some extreme levels of physicality, but that actually was not the case. The first period of that first game was exceptionally slow, and while it did get better as the game went on, and then in the second game it was also a good bit better as well, it never really quite matched the intensity of what you would expect from a normal NHL playoff game. And there's a couple of reasons I would say for that, at least that I thought of. The first of which is that in the NHL, you've got like 18,000 really loud, excited fans in the arena who bring such excitement that the players are able to feed off of that energy and use it to really bring the intensity on the ice. When they lay a hit, whether they're the home team or the away team, there's going to be cheers or there's going to be boos, and they can really get into the game and then throw another hit, and then on their next shift really get into it physically. But for this one, it takes place in the Los Angeles Kings home arena that seats 18,000 people. It's not in the Ontario Reigns normal arena. And when you're seating 18,000 people, it's a very, very big venue, and there's only about 1,000 people in attendance. The sound level, the energy level, the noise, it just wasn't quite there. And so for the players on the ice, they kind of have to manufacture their own intensity, which is simply not an easy thing to do. The other reason is, and maybe this is a little bit more cynical, but for a lot of these hockey players growing up as like 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds at the beginning of their hockey journey, their ultimate dream that they're looking forward to is lifting the Stanley Cup, right? That's what you want to do as a hockey player, what you work your entire life, your entire career towards. Not many of these guys, I imagine, were growing up really hoping to win the Calder Cup. And so it's just a little bit of a different kind of expectation, I would say, for these guys. Again, this is somewhat of a cynical view and maybe just a little bit I'm speculating here, but that would be my thought process about the situation. And so when it comes to Cardwell, to circle back here onto the player, I thought he would thrive in a more so physical style of game that just didn't quite fully exist. That's not to say there were no hits thrown, but it didn't quite match the expectations that I thought it would. And so for Ethan Cardwell, I think as these playoffs do go on, that should increase. For instance, the Barracuda will be playing a couple of home games in their next series. That will hopefully bring the excitement level required to really get these players into it, and that's when Cardwell can truly shine. It's not as though these games were bad, but kind of like with Colin Graf, I was holding slightly higher expectations for him. And honestly, the same would go with Zach Ostapchuk, but even more so because, as I mentioned earlier on, this was a player who the Sharks acquired in that Fabian Zetterlund trade. That is a pretty important player to be moving on from, so there's a lot of hype and a lot of sort of hope put into Ostapchuk as a player. It was quite clear in the NHL this season he wasn't really ready to make that jump, but previously when within the Ottawa Senators organization, he had been putting up some really good numbers in the AHL, so I thought that would translate here with the San Jose Barracuda. Not quite the case through both of these games. Again, it's not bad, but it's not great. Hopefully that can trend upwards as these playoffs move on. But that will do it for this round one recap. The Barracuda will be facing off against the Colorado Eagles in the second round. This is the first seed in the Pacific Division. This is because the Barracuda were the second lowest seed in these playoffs, and the lowest one, Tucson, did lose in the first round to the Abbotsford Canucks. And so Barracuda will have their hands full with a very good Colorado Eagles team. One thing that is very interesting and an interesting quirk of the AHL playoffs system is the fact that while the Barracuda were in action already and have won their first two games of these playoffs, the Eagles have not yet played. They had a bye through the first round because they are the first seed, and it remains to be seen who exactly that benefits here. Is it the Eagles who have been able to sit and rest and maybe scout the Barracuda, what they're able to do, or is it the Barracuda who have had the time to warm up and build up some momentum heading into that series? We shall see. In the season series between these two teams, the Barracuda had some middling success. They went 3-5, so slightly below negative, or slightly below average, but not too bad. Again, important to point out that because Askarov only played 22 games this season, I imagine that he didn't get every single one of these games against the Colorado Eagles. That's going to be a major difference maker, as I mentioned earlier on. This is not going to be, let's say, a cakewalk for the Colorado Eagles. The Barracuda have a very real chance, especially if some players return from injury, to do some damage here against the Pacific Division's number one seed. Class dismissed.